Happy Friday, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Really glad to have you with us on what I think is going to be a really fun show. Great way to end the week and kick off the weekend. Jeff Sintel here in just a few minutes. A lot of recruiting talk with him. I'll also ask him about James Cook. That's been the most popular topic in the comment section this week. The 2018 running back signee, I guess the final member of the 2018 class to sort of arrive here in Athens, given the fact that Tramel Walthour and Nadab Joseph made different announcements. Jeff will tell us the latest on James Cook, and it seems from Jeff's perspective this is going to end up being good news. So that'll be fun with Jeff Sintel. A lot to do before we get there. We're glad you're with us. DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I think it's safe to say that right now, Las Vegas really loves UGA. Now, some of you care about that, some of you don't. You know, we have this new, law in America now where sports gambling is going to become legal in certain states. They're going to choose to adopt a brand new landscape there. But nonetheless, some of you don't pay any attention to the gambling landscape whatsoever. I completely get that. And yet I still think that what gamblers or the sports bettors, what they say about college football, for me, is always going to hold a bit of weight. There's always going to be some merit to that because they put their money where their mouth is. You know, I spout off all the time, a million opinions. Half the time, who can even remember what I've said from one day to the next, the same way with other people who sort of do this stuff for a living. And yet when the Vegas folks are wrong, they lose money because they put some money behind what they say. So when they make a big, bold proclamation about Georgia, it's probably worth paying attention to. I saw where, I guess Saturday Down South reported this from the South Point Sportsbook and Casino there in Las Vegas. That's the sports book that likes to think of itself as the number one sports book for college football. Whether it is or isn't, I'm not sure. That's just sort of the brand they're trying to go after there. They've got their over-unders for college football teams, and including the SEC. And Alabama did have the highest over-under total at 11. We'll have more on the Crimson Tide, I guess, a little later on that particular subject. But Georgia not too far behind at 10.5. Now, I'm going to get deep in the weeds here for 2 seconds. There's a chance I may not fully explain all this correctly, but I think I've got the basic gist of this right. For 10.5 as an over-under total, what that means, as many of you are aware, you either bet that Georgia will win more games than that, which would be 11 or 12 in the regular season, or obviously fewer games than that in the regular season. But the bets are not weighed equally. There's sort of an extra price for choosing one side or the other. For instance, Alabama, who's over-under at 11, it's a little more expensive to bet the under. In other words, Vegas says, here's your over-under total, and yet the under 11 is a little more likely than the over. Alabama's more likely to lose a game than go undefeated in the regular season, in other words. For Georgia, though, with the over-under at 10.5, as the gamblers like to say, the juice, so to speak, is on the over. You have to pay a little bit more to bet the over. It's like minus 120, something along those lines. So in other words, from Vegas's perspective, the South Point Hotel and Casino in particular here, it's a little more likely, the most likely outcome of all for Georgia this upcoming season is 11 or more regular season wins here in 2018. Now that's obviously, even if you don't follow the gambling market here, that particular takeaway is probably good news for many of the Georgia fans who are listening right now. And it's also, I guess, probably worth on a show like ours where we talk about this stuff every day to sort of try to decide why is that the somewhat common opinion when it comes to Georgia. And the point that I've tried to hammer home over and over again is, in addition to Georgia's strengths, and I think there are many, we also have a situation here where the main competition that Georgia faces during the season, the SEC East, for me, I just think the SEC East is still down. And yes, Georgia does have to go on the road to Missouri, and obviously Drew Lock as a potential first-round draft pick quarterback, playing a guy like that in his own stadium is never easy, and yet for a Georgia team as strong as the one that was put on display a year ago, that game is certainly not the kind of game that's going to scare most Georgia fans. Even South Carolina, and in our comment section every day, we take a lot of live comments on our video program all the time. South Carolina does come up. But the same Vegas folks who like Georgia here to the tune of 10.5 have also made Georgia, about a 15-point favorite against South Carolina. That's not exactly a sweat job, at least from the definition of Las Vegas. To say nothing of the two main rivals that you think of for Georgia in the SEC East, Tennessee and Florida. I think both those teams are still down in 2018, despite the fact they have new coaches. It is worth pointing out here, though, Pete Futak, a college football writer that I like, who joined us yesterday on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. It sounds like he somewhat disagrees. As a way of being, I guess, at least somewhat fair and balanced here, let me let you hear from Futak, a reminder from yesterday that maybe Georgia does have something to think about when it comes to its rival Tennessee with brand new coach in Jeremy Pruitt, and the offensive-minded Dan Mullen is a brand new coach at Florida. Here's Pete Futak from yesterday.
Tennessee and Florida, kind of the same boat, different thing. Tennessee's going to be better. They're not going to win the SEC East, but they're going to at least not be a speed bump like they were last year. And they did have their chances. If they didn't lose, on that last second throw, to Florida, and they had a couple of other close calls along the way, and then they just melted down obviously at the end. But there's enough talent there where they can be a danger. Florida, I do think, can flip that switch quickly. Remember, they did go to 2 straight SEC championships under Jim McElwain. So there's enough there where if you get the right formula on the right day, they can absolutely rise up and rock just that one day in a cocktail party where they can pull off that upset win. They could be good enough under Mullen to just have that tweak offensively right out of the gate.
I've told you before that Pete Futak is a college football writer that I like, but just because you like a guy doesn't mean you agree with everything that he says. Obviously, based on the stuff that I've said in the past, I don't agree with Pete Futak on that. I don't think there's some magic trick that Dan Mullen can pull in year one. I don't think he has a quarterback on that roster. And, he's going to have probably an okay offensive line when you think about the 2 tackles who are probably pretty good. The running back situation, I think, is no better than average. I just think that Florida as a team is no better than average. Finding a 7th or even 8th win, I think, for Florida this season is going to be very difficult to do. Tennessee is likely still terrible, at least in my mind, unless Keller Christ, who is the yet-to-arrive, soon-to-arrive graduate transfer quarterback from Stanford, unless he is just, way better than a lot of people think or way better than a lot of people expect, I think Tennessee's probably going to be pretty bad. I am not worried about either of Georgia's 2 rivals in the SEC East. To go back to Kirby Smart here for a minute from the spring, he's not worried about them either. But for a far different reason. A lot of the media pays attention to these new coaches and what's happening there. But Kirby Smart's not spending any of his time paying attention to any of these other programs in the division. He's worried about what his own team is doing. And ultimately, Kirby Smart believes that whether or not Georgia lives up to the expectations that the media or Las Vegas has for UGA is more about what Georgia does than what any of Georgia's opponents does or does not do. Here's a little bit of Kirby Smart explaining why he doesn't care about any of these SEC East rivals for the moment.
I look at it just like I did last year. I mean, we got to beat them. The names and faces may change, but the places are all the same. So, I mean, I'm not concerned with what they're doing, and they're not probably concerned with what we're doing. We're obviously trying to develop a team that believes in its self-confidence, but I don't concern myself with what those guys are doing.
Now, by the way, that mindset, that attitude that Kirby Smart puts on display there, that's also probably part of the reason why Las Vegas likes Georgia so much. Yes, it is a manageable schedule, and we'll get into a moment just how manageable some people think it truly is. But the manager of that schedule, Kirby Smart, and the demeanor that he puts on display there, that's the kind of thing that the betting public typically likes. It's the kind of thing that Georgia fans like. This notion of, I don't care who our opponent is, whether expected to be good, expected to be not so good, we're going to approach the game with the same tenacity no matter what. Kirby Smart does that, and he obviously raised the fortunes of the Georgia program in 2017 because of that very same attitude. But that attitude from the Georgia team brings about sort of a new attitude and change for Georgia fans a bit. All of a sudden, Georgia goes into a season not, at least from a fan standpoint, not like it was before 2017 when you were wishing and hoping to see something good happen. Or even 2016 when you wondered if one day Georgia might burst through in a big way. Or the Mark Richt tenure where over and over again Georgia fans thought they were close only to be somewhat disappointed. Now the expectations are through the roof even in comparison to what they've typically been for UGA. And in a lot of ways, it is a dawning of a new era for UGA fan expectations. And once again, to go back to Pete Futak's conversation on DawgNation Daily yesterday, he said it's one of those situations now where for some Georgia fans, it's coming to grips with the new reality of it's either make the college football playoff, get back to the national championship, actually hoist the trophy, or by almost any definition of expectations for Georgia, the season's kind of a disappointment. Here's Pete Futak on that point.
On the one hand, it's obviously a good thing. You want to have a program that's close to playing for the national championship. You love having the expectations there. But at the same time, it's almost like, okay, we just have to get there or else. It's so hard to win it. Everything's got to break the right way now. And the good part about this is now, Kirby Smart in Georgia coming off a great year with a great recruiting class. Now the expectation is, yes, you're at that get to the college football playoff level every year.
Which sort of leads me, I guess, to the final point that I want to make on this subject. Whether you plan on betting Georgia to win more than 10.5 games or not, what I think every Georgia fan really likes about Kirby Smart is that he came to Georgia, I think, knowing two things: what the expectations already were and what they were going to become once he started having success. And I do believe that Kirby Smart had confidence that he would have success. And at no point in time in Kirby's Georgia career, not as an introductory press conference, not before the 2017 season, and not now, has Kirby Smart done anything to shy away from those expectations. He takes them full on. In fact, Kirby Smart has explained before that even the success of 2017 doesn't do a lot to change his mindset. He still expects to go out and be just as good no matter what happened the year before. Here's a little more from Kirby.
I think that team is that team. You kind of absorb that and embrace that, but I don't think that I can put down those expectations. The expectations are what they are at University of Georgia. The expectation is to win every game you play. Why should it be any different?
Yeah, why should it be any different? And I guess the bottom line of all of this for Kirby Smart is because of what the media says, because of what Las Vegas says, there is just, let's face it here, extra pressure on Georgia. But the overall point here is it seems like, based on the things that he says, is that Kirby Smart's the kind of coach that can thrive in that environment and thrive under this kind of pressure. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Good to have you with us. We're presented by Marco's Pizza. Glad to have you watching the show today on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook page, DawgNation YouTube page, live on the DawgNation Twitter feed as well. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and available in podcast form. Pretty much wherever podcasts can be found. Apple Podcasts, Android devices, the world-famous DawgNation.com. I post the show at SoundCloud. We're just glad that you've checked out DawgNation Daily today. And maybe this weekend, sitting around the deck, sitting around the pool, you'll check out a little Marco's Pizza, authentic Italian pizza. The original Gianmarco family recipe there. 3 melted cheeses blended together on that crust. Good stuff and a great offer. How about 2 medium, 2-topping pizzas right now for just $6.99 each every day, the Italian way. Hello, Primo. And hello, Marco's Pizza, as a part of a DawgNation Daily here today. We'll have Jeff Sintel coming up a little later on. We'll talk to Jeff about a lot of stuff. James Cook, C.J. Clark, a lot of the big news that has sort of reverberated around message boards here. We're going to do a lot of that with Jeff Sintel coming up in just a moment. Before we get to that, though, we just talked a good bit about Kirby Smart and the attitude of a season ago and, exceeding expectations last year, but setting up heavy expectations for this year. And I think that one of the things that fueled what Georgia did a year ago was to go back and, Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel have talked about this. We've talked about it here on our program. This notion of getting revenge in 2017 for the opponents that had beaten Georgia in 2016. We sort of jokingly called it the revenge tour. Other people kind of picked up on that theme, and it sort of became this thing that got talked about. And, at the very end of the season, against the final opponent that had beaten Georgia in 2016, the in-state rival Georgia Tech, Kirby at the very end of the year finally acknowledged, maybe this was a bit of a revenge tour for the Dogs in 2017. Here's Kirby Smart as a fun reminder of that.
You guys make a big deal about a revenge tour. We try not to make it about that, but we checked the last box on that list today, and it meant a lot to send these seniors out the right way. I still have memories of Nick Chubb sitting in my office and telling me why he's coming back. So I wanted it more for him than for anybody to send him out the right way, and really all of them, but it's just Nick specifically said he couldn't sleep at night thinking about it and gave him an opportunity to go to sleep now.
That's a fun line from Kirby Smart, and you love the idea of Nick Chubb and his unfinished business, and it's just kind of fun to think about that dominant win for Georgia against Georgia Tech last season. And one of the historical significant, additions to that storyline from last year was another in a long streak of wins for Georgia in Atlanta. Dogs haven't lost to Georgia Tech in Bobby Dodd Stadium since 1999. Once again, in that same press conference, Kirby Smart was kind of asked about that. What does all this mean? What's all this about? And Kirby Smart, I think for the most part, downplays the real meaning of the fact that Georgia's won so much in Atlanta. Here's more from Kirby.
I think it's been more to do with the fact that, Georgia has played well there. I think a lot of the kids are at home. A lot of kids are from that area. I don't really know what to attribute that to. It usually has something to do with the X's and O's and the players involved in the game. And I hadn't really been part of that series for a long time, so I can't attribute it to anything.
You may be wondering why, kind of out of nowhere on a Friday, am I bringing up these old lines from Kirby Smart about last year's Georgia Tech game. The real honest truth is, the reason why is, I was looking at ESPN.com this week, and they had their list of like 10 easiest non-conference schedules for the upcoming season. Georgia does make the list at number 9 on the list. I was reading what ESPN had said about Georgia, and they made mention of the fact that the one non-conference sort of big opponent Georgia has this year is Georgia Tech, coming back to Athens, and they reminded us in there of the fact that Georgia Tech has actually won in Athens in its last 2 trips. 2 times in a row, Georgia Tech has won in Athens. Obviously, we all remember that, but reading that at ESPN.com is certainly no fun. It's a reminder to me of, boy, that is something that really needs to change this fall. I would like to see Georgia not only win that game, but maybe do it in sort of impressive fashion so we don't have to read that junk in ESPN.com anytime soon. All right, it's good to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. We got Jeff Sintel coming up. Before we do that, let me also take care of a little business here with our Kroger Click List checklist. Obviously, we roll through the summer here, but still plenty going on with UGA, including the celebration of the national championship, the Georgia track and field doing that. Petros Kipriano, and I hope I pronounced his name correctly, named Coach of the Year in Georgia, enjoying that track and field championship, and so close to also doing that on the women's side there as well. And, of course, a big weekend of Georgia visitors for recruiting coming up. Jeff's got that for you at DawgNation.com as well. You can read that in his Intel. And speaking of Kroger, they bring the Kroger Click List checklist to you, and they remind you that with Suns out, that means the cookout this weekend. Everything you need for a red-white barbecue this summer, you can find at your local Atlanta Kroger, and what a great way to do that with Father's Day coming up here this weekend, too. So we'll talk more about that later on. It's good to have you with us, and we hope you enjoy Jeff Sintel right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
I will say happy Friday to my good friend Jeff Sintel. I hope he's getting ready for a fabulous Father's Day weekend. My guess is for him that probably means watching a little U.S. Open. I'm looking forward to watching some golf this weekend, too, and enjoying some time with my wife and kids. Jeff, I'll say good morning to you. And can I just say one thing to you before we get started here? I have been... And I don't mean this as sort of like the typical puffery of promotional corporate speak here. I mean this in all sincerity. Your Sintel Intels have been loaded this week, Jeff. You've had like 9 or 10 news items, and every one of these things, the best that I can tell this week, they have been supersized Sintel Intels. Is that just a function of the times that we're in with a lot going on with UGA recruiting, or you drinking an extra cup of coffee in the morning? Because these things have been jam-packed.
Hey, Brandon, in true humble yourself fashion, I appreciate the compliment there and the sentiment there, man. But, hey, man, I'm going to say a blind squirrel finds a few nuggets every once in a while, man.
That is indeed true. I want to talk to you about a lot of the stuff that's been bouncing around the forum.DawgNation.com this week. Before we get to that, though, let me, bounce kind of a crackpot theory off of you for a moment. Obviously, we're all kind of coming to grips with these new NCAA rules, the 4-game season that can still count as a red shirt, the more liberal transfer rule that's coming to place here, and put the transfer part of this aside for a moment and just look at the red shirt stuff. I guess the more I think about this, the more I wonder if this is going to have any real significant impact on Georgia really at all. And hear me out on that. Because I think for some Georgia freshmen, the ones that end up redshirting are guys that have a hard time, finding a way on the field because of the depth of competition. And if Kirby can play a freshman 4 games, he's probably going to try to find a way to play him more than 4 games, right? Is there a chance that this ends up impacting other schools more than what we think of as a pretty talent-rich program like Georgia?
Well, I like the rule, first and foremost, for everybody out there because it benefits the student-athlete. It gives them options. I know everybody's looking at that. They're thinking 4 games. They're thinking, and then they're really, playing that jump to conclusions game, 4 games for Fields, keep the red shirt, class separation between him and Fromm. I mean, I think the main things to start thinking about is you got to make sure you couch all this 4-game red shirt stuff with the sentiment that you still, if you move anywhere, you're going to have to deal with conference rules and you're still going to have to sit out a year. With the instant transfer rule. But what I think happened, it'll clean up a lot of the messes over the last few years with Solomon Kinley and how he played, I think, a couple reps in an injury situation against Missouri, and then he had to come back and arbiter a little bit for his red shirt. I think the same case is happening right now with Jaden Hunter, who basically only played one game last year and is trying to get redshirt status back from the NCAA for that docket of appearances last year. So, the thing there, I think it makes it happy, is when you're going to have a loaded depth chart like Georgia, especially in the secondary or the receiver spots, it'll prevent some of that grass is greener type stuff when, a highly touted prospect. Let me just use some examples like maybe a Matt Landers, maybe an Amir Speed in previous years, guys that are good but not immediate impact guys, like the Minka Fitzpatrick territory, that sort of five-star freshman, Jamari Sawyer territory right there. What it does is it will give them just a little bit of a taste of playing time to realize that their working and their efforts are not being lost in a redshirt season. It will help them go harder during the whole course of the week, during the typical game week, even though when they know it's November and their redshirt was decided back in September. I think that keeps a lot of folks happy, and I think that's something to consider when these guys can get some playing time, and then they can also preserve that redshirt year. Not a lot of folks might remember this, but back in the day, 20, 25, 35 years ago, that was the redshirt rule anyway. You could play up to 4 games where the coaches could find out whether or not you had the stuff to play right away in your first year, and then you could still preserve your redshirt year. So I know everybody kind of wonders if this is forward-thinking or innovative or new ways, but that's kind of the way it used to be done.
All right, let me talk about James Cook here for a moment. As you know, that's maybe the hottest topic on the DawgNation forum here over the last few days. People want to know what's going on with him. He is, I guess, the final member of the 2018 class to either make any kind of announcement or show up at UGA here. And you've said before you think these guys deserve a little privacy as they deal with the final remnants of their high school career. But you did write this week, though, in your Centel Intel that you think ultimately there's nothing to worry about for UGA fans when it comes to James Cook. Obviously, when you see freshmen at Georgia and don't see Cook yet, that's going to raise some eyebrows for some UGA fans. But you tried, I think, to put out a fire on that this week. Is that fair to say?
I don't know. I think folks can kind of just see what we do there. I mean, I was a guy that, didn't really harp on the Dadav Joseph stuff at all. But then when the course was set, I put that news out there as fast as I could that he had enrolled and would be going to Independence for at least 18 months, most likely. So I'm a guy that's not going to put a guy's laundry or business out there until all the chips are cashed in and the path is clear. I just think with James Cook, there's a lot of worries, especially since he's the last one, and this is a hypersensitive news culture. I'm just going to throw up a few key factoids here. James Cook, kind of like Calvin Ridley a few years back in the state of Florida, would have been too old to have his whole team to compete for his entire senior season. So he reclassified, about 18 months ago, from a 2019 prospect to a 2018 prospect. So he was playing catch-up with a lot of credits. He finished his senior season out at Miami Central and then transferred to Miami Northwestern to expedite that process. And to me, simplest way I can say it is it's not news yet when a player is not at the University of Georgia. A signee is now at the University of Georgia in early June.
Okay, there you go on that. The other thing that's been kind of kicked around a bunch here is the C.J. Clark situation, defensive lineman who, it certainly seems like from my perspective, this is a guy whose status as a prospect has grown. Georgia's interest in him over the time seems to have grown to the point where he's, I think, sort of become a big UGA priority here. But there's also been some online chatter as of late of maybe Clark interest in other schools, maybe in some of the in-state schools there in North Carolina, and all of a sudden some Georgia fans are a little concerned that all of a sudden this big defensive lineman who they have grown to like here may be liking another school. Is there reason for UGA fans to worry about missing on this big defensive lineman?
It's a miss per se, Brandon. It's a target. I mean, I think I put on our forum message board that there are certain recruits that are worth getting the Fred G. Sanford heart palpitations about. C.J. Clark to me is just not a guy like that. He is a piece. I think he's rated as the number 17 defensive tackle in the country. I've seen him live in a competitive setting. He seems to me like he is a great athlete, but he also seems to me like he's a guy that might need a redshirt season should he arrive. I don't think he's an instant impact guy, even though Georgia desperately needs defensive tackles. So there's some intrigue right now leading up to his decision on Monday. I know how so many guys out there and the DawgNation ladies and DawgNation gentlemen are kind of frothing at the mouth right now for a commitment because they see what other schools are doing. CJ Clark, you got to remember, state of North Carolina. He's got a lot of late interest now in NC State, and I want folks just to try to educate him a little bit. NC State has pumped out the defensive linemen. You think of Bradley Chubb, but there's more than that. And really, you look at it, what NC State on the resume has done with defensive linemen this year, that track record of putting those guys into the NFL is better than what's happening at the University of Georgia right now. So those are reasons why an in-state kid will think about this. And, these aren't supposed to be layup or 2-foot putt type decisions on a lot of these guys out of state. Other thing to think about there with CJ Clark is that he's made a lot of visits to Georgia. He's been prioritized for a long time. And I think it was kind of clear after a couple of visits this spring that he was ready to make his decision. So lots of moving pieces with that. I would remind everybody that the hearts and minds of 17 and 18-year-old young men are some of the most unstable properties in the known universe, and he'll have a big decision on Monday. Brandon, I also want to share something. If you guys hear the whistles in the background, I apologize, but I'm actually currently watching Brandon's favorite topic in the spring of 2018, competing right now at the 7-on-7s at the Corky Kell Classic. That would be 5-star Archer defensive back prospect Andrew Booth.
Ooh, wow.
Wearing some gold shoes today, playing some receiver, sweating a lot because there's going to be a busy day of competition with 35 teams here at the Corky Kell Classic 7-on-7.
Jeff, I tell you what, we appreciate you spending some time on the phone with us with that big event going on. Andrew Booth right in your field division there. Thanks for spending some time about talking to us while all that's going down. Let me put you on the witness stand, though, on Clark for a minute further before we get more of the sights and sounds there from the Corky Kell 7-on-7 event. I do think that defensive line recruiting for 2019 does put Trey Scott certainly at the forefront of conversation for UGA fans, because if you look at the last couple of recruiting cycles for Georgia, that's the one position group that's not really just bursting at the seams right now. The 2017 class somewhat absent. Those elite defensive linemen. 2018 kind of the same way here. In 2019, I think there is some pressure on Georgia to collect some of those bodies. And you've said before, hey, watch the offers. As long as Georgia's not offering more people, that means they like the targets they're going after. But you did allude in the Centel Intel this week when you were writing about those 2020 defensive linemen in Georgia that right now UGA's, I think the phrase you use is, kind of chasing down a lot of these guys around the 2019 class. I mean, it certainly seems like it is somewhat unsettled for Georgia in the defensive line for 2019. And if CJ Clark is a player that Georgia wants, then if you're Trey Scott, you got to beat out North Carolina State. I mean, I don't care about Bradley Chubb or any of those guys. You got to beat out. If CJ Clark is someone that you want, North Carolina State is a middling program. You've just got to beat them out in-state or not.
Well, there's a lot of moving pieces to what you talked about there. First of all, the 2020 class, Brandon, in-state, the crop of defensive linemen is just better than what's in-state in the class of 2019. Now, there's not a Travon Walker per se, except maybe Hillgrove 4-star defensive end Miles Murphy. He just has incredible feet, great agility and everything else. But in terms of overall depth, I kind of rolled off a bunch of names. So that might be a reason why Georgia doesn't have to go all in with a lot of in-state offers or go heavy at the defensive tackle spot in 2019, because there's a lot of guys in that 2020 class that are looking good and perhaps even leaning that way towards the University of Georgia. The one thing you're seeing with a lot of these offers, Brandon, is it's camp season. Let me remind everybody that this is a lot of times when Georgia brings in the guys that they really like, and they get a chance to be seen on the hoof and evaluated by all the staff, all the analysts. They film every rep. These are really true offers that are coming out right now. Maybe the only thing that might stop them short of being a committable offer would be if they don't have a lot of good tape on a prospect and they want to see what the first 2 or 3 games look like in a prospect's senior year. But a lot of these, there's been a few defensive linemen that's been in town. There's been a few that have left with offers. There's a few that came into town with offers but then got a really good workout as well. Numerous names that pop into mind. So that's kind of the traffic pattern right now. It's kind of different in the month of June, especially this month of June when the program, when Georgia has definitely brought in 3 or 4 weeks of loaded visitors lists for 7-on-7s. and even private workouts. Man, there's so many workouts that have happened at the University of Georgia at certain positions, quarterback and others, over the last maybe 1 to 2 weeks or so that have been very interesting.
All right, I know you're busy, so let me try to bounce through a couple issues here before we let you go. I want to talk about some visitors to Athens this weekend that you've reported on at DawgNation in a moment. Before that, though, speaking of visitors, Nico Dean back on campus for UGA. You had some great quotes from him in the Intel at DawgNation, but I will admit there's always, for me, a degree of skepticism when a player comes to campus and he brings some of his high school teammates with him. I almost wonder sometimes is this more about trying to get them some pub than a visit for the principal in the matter here, which is Nico Dean. I mean, what do you make of this latest visit for Dean to UGA?
Well, this was, I think, kind of huge because he went with a couple of teammates, but one of those guys already had a Georgia offer anyway. The other things that stick out about this is the first time that Mr. Dean got the chance to really get coached up and work by the Georgia staff. It was essentially a positional drill workout. He spent a lot of time teaching and learning and getting a good facsimile of what things would be like if he was an inside linebacker at the University of Georgia. Now, the fit was excellent. He liked everything about getting coached up. He said he feels very comfortable at Georgia, and he solidified in kind of no uncertain terms that he's going to come back to Georgia for an official visit, and this was in advance of his Alabama official visit this weekend for Nico Dean. And he also said he's going to make another trip inside of that, Brandon. And as I dropped a little nugget on the forum, that was kind of, I went a little bit further than what was on our main board and our main website. There was something about the way that when I asked him about when he plans to have a return trip to Georgia, there was something about the way Nico Dean said that. I don't know if it's Arnold Schwarzenegger-esque, like I'll be back, like the Terminator, but just the way that the mnemonics and the way his speech patterns were, he placed the right emphasis on the right syllables. And I know, Brandon, you have heard that straight out of Nico Dean's mouth. You would have felt encouraged about the progress of that recruitment.
That is an interesting thought for sure, Jeff. Thanks for dropping that in here. All right, let me hit a couple of these visits this weekend, and we can do this pretty quick. Darius Thomas, offensive lineman from Arkansas, is expected to be there. I was reading about him in your Intel this week, and for me, this is a classic example of what seems like, and you kind of wrote about this too, a Sam Pittman offensive lineman. And what I mean when I say that is he is not rated as highly as some other offensive linemen that you and I have talked about before, but, man, he's bigger, and, boy, Pittman and Kirby seem to like these guys who are bigger, and that gives them a little bit of a leg up in terms of getting some attention from UGA. Looks like Thomas is another example of that, right?
Yeah, that's a guy. He's an state of Arkansas prospect, and that's, the reputation for Sam Pittman will definitely precede itself for at least a couple more years in the state of Arkansas with big-time players. He's coming in this weekend on an official visit. He just started his official visit season back on May the 25th, and he's been to Ole Miss. I think he's going to go to Memphis. Looks like Georgia's the biggest official visit on the docket so far. Doesn't plan on taking this recruitment very long, is what I've been told. And he's a guy very purposeful. You're not going to see a lot of media out of him. Basically just puts his intended communications up on Twitter. That's how he kind of announced he was making his official visit. And you look at him, 6'6", probably a little bit bigger than 6'6", already about 310 pounds. The type of guy, Georgia, if you guys listen to this program a lot, everybody knows that Georgia is going to go heavy on first and second and third helpings, maybe at offensive tackle this year, and they're not going to concentrate too much at center and guard.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And then C.J. Daniel, the junior college cornerback, I mean, he seems kind of interesting to me. If he's legitimately 6 feet tall, then that's a pretty interesting little prospect, right?
Brandon, I think everybody, while we were talking about the Andrew Booth frothing of the mouth, you got to remember, a guy like DJ Daniel is a 2017 prospect. He would have been a guy that would have came in with guys like Malik Herring and Richard LeCount. So you're talking about a more physical, a more developed athlete coming out of Georgia Military College. I think he's ranked as the nation's number 2 junior college cornerback this year, and also the number 5 overall junior college prospect. He's taking a big official visit to Georgia this weekend. I don't think this recruitment is going to go very long at all. And as we wrote about, maybe almost 2 weeks ago, when the name DJ Daniel started popping up, Brandon, he told me, matter-of-factly, if he would have had all the offers and all the grades he wanted coming out of high school,
he very likely would have chosen Georgia. And then he told me specifically when he got the Georgia offer after a recent visit and workout, probably about 10 days ago, he said that was one of those offers that kind of just took his breath away.
Wow.
So I'm not big about saying, potential commitment watch or anything else like that, but I'm just going to say it wouldn't surprise me if his commitment happened sooner rather than later.
I was going to ask you about quarterbacks. This is 2 visits in a row that I was going to do that. I guess we'll punt on this one more time. Instead, as we get ready to say goodbye, just give me some sights and sounds from what you've seen there at the Corky Kell 7-on-7 event. You mentioned Andrew Booth. For those people who can't be, boots on the ground, eyes on the prospects, give us another idea of kind of what you're taking a look at there this weekend.
Yeah, Booth is a guy, incredible recovery speed, wearing some gold shoes. Got all the right, wristlets and armbands and sleeves. The right combination of all that with the do-rag. When you just see some players, they're like, okay, he's got to be an excellent player to pull off all those accessories. And Andrew Booth definitely does. I think he's already made 1 interception, a couple of recovery tackles, and he's been working so far against some pretty good guys. He's been going against Central Gwinnett. That's Justin Fomby. Everybody remembers that name, the quarterback that came into Athens this week and left without an offer. I'm just simply going to share objectively what my eyes see about Justin Fomby. Not very accurate, not having a good morning so far. That might be a reason why that offer didn't come from UGA this week. And then you look across, you've got Aaron McLaughlin, the talented Beaufort quarterback. Colquitt County's here with Dejon Edwards, the running back prospect, the 2020 class who really likes Georgia as well. So this is a loaded field, 35-8. Walton, Dominic Blaylock. Walton's in the field. Blessed Trinity's in the field. J.D. Bertrand. Wow. Kind of a who's who right now. Let's remember Beaufort is here. You just look around. You see McEachern and all their talented 2020 prospects. Really talented 2021 quarterback is working right now as well for McEachern. That was the one that threw the ball all over for 4 touchdowns in the state playoffs last year as a true freshman against Lowndes. So this one, and it's very different, Brandon, from most of the typical 7-on-7 stuff we cover and we see, because these are actually these highly rated guys performing with their teammates. They're high school teammates. They're not on an all-star team like the Cam Newton squad, like the very well-respected Hustle Inc. squad. So this is more about teammates and working with the guys that they'll play with this fall. So you got to think it means just a little bit more.
I tell you what, I think you're right about that, and it's a great job for you to be out there covering that as extensively as you are. We appreciate that on behalf of everybody who reads DawgNation every day, and I say personally thanks for being on the phone with us while you're doing all this. Jeff, I look forward to talking to you soon. We got a big week next week we're going to look forward to telling people more about, but for now, let me just get ready to say goodbye, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, guys, see if you can pry anything out of Brandon anytime soon. We got a surprise for a different pocket of audience in the state of Georgia coming next week. Let me just leave it at that.
Thanks for opening that can of worms, Jeff.
You got it, Brandon.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, you hear Jeff there at the end. We do have something big going down next week. This is not me trying to play coy. I honestly don't know all the details yet. Jeff and I are not always the most organized when it comes to planning things, but we are really excited about a big event coming up this week. I'm looking forward to telling you more about that. I tell you what, let me do this. By Monday, I'll give you all the details, including how it impacts you. We'll do that, but many of you have asked for us to kind of get outside Atlanta, kind of get out of the city here. Well, next week we're going to do that, so we'll tell you more about that as we can. As I said, on Monday, I'll kind of deliver more of those details to you just a bit. Instead, how about Jeff at the Corky Kell 7-on-7, the big, one of these big summer events? It's Father's Day weekend. He's grinding on a Friday morning, doing double duty, talking to us and covering recruits. So you got to give him credit for that, man. He is all over the place when it comes to UGA recruiting. By the way, it's time for our SEC Through. Hope you'll check out SEC Country Live. No show today, back on Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time on the SEC Country video channels. And I'll also remind you that as you're thinking about Father's Day weekend, why don't you think about Kroger and their reminder to you to fire up the flavor with specials on pork back ribs, corn, smoked sausage. Boy, what a meal that would be. Just that alone, right? Pork back ribs and corn and smoked sausage. You can get all that at your local Atlanta Kroger. They got some great deals. It's a great way to kind of get around on Father's Day, celebrate, with him. He's the dad's probably the grill master in your family, maybe, but what a good time to do that for Father's Day. Really good stuff there. Let me do a few SEC stories here. I mentioned a moment ago that Georgia shows up on ESPN's list of top 10 easiest non-conference schedules. And by the way, the presence of Georgia on a list like that this year, even though it includes every year an in-state rival like Georgia Tech, despite the fact that, as I said before, Tech does have the winning streak in Athens, maybe for me this is an argument for why maybe Georgia ought to look at some other non-conference opponents. If playing Georgia Tech can't get you off the list of easiest non-conference schedules, then maybe there's not much point in playing Georgia Tech anymore, but that's probably a different topic for a different day. Georgia came in at number 9 on this list. Alabama comes in at number 10. So Alabama also thought of as one of the easiest non-conference schedules. Now, to the Tide's credit, they virtually always play a non-conference season opener on one of these neutral site venues, and they have played some really good teams in the past. Florida State preseason last year at least was a good team. USC the year before that, it's a big-time reputation. It's been Clemson, it's been Virginia Tech. This year, though, it's just Louisville, and it's Louisville without Lamar Jackson. Alabama's about a 30-point favorite there. That's one of the reasons why Alabama shows up here. And by the way, speaking of Alabama, over-under from the South Point at 11. I mean, I think there's a real risk here for maybe Georgia, but we'll push Georgia aside here for a moment. For Alabama here, it could just be boring for Alabama this season. Easy non-conference game, heavy favorite in most of the SEC West games. I mean, they could be like the Golden State Warriors of the SEC West in a lot of ways. And, the debate about do you play Tua, do you play Jalen, as I've said on SEC Country Live, assuming they both stay, it may not matter who you play until you play Auburn and Georgia, because Jalen Hurts or Tua Tagovailoa or even maybe the third-string quarterback Mac Jones, they could probably all do well against the level of competition that Alabama is going to spend most of this season playing. Florida, I guess, has reportedly added, not even reportedly, the kid tweets it out himself, has added a player for its 2018 class. Lucas Krull is his name. He is a junior college tight end. Now, he is a highly rated junior college prospect, but if you look into his backstory here a little bit, he actually hasn't played a ton of football. And while he transfers as a junior college guy, eligible for 2018, in fact, Mullen tweeted out last night the Florida hashtag for their 2018 class, he's got 3 years of eligibility. I think it's, I will admit, a little bit weird to bring in a project and use a scholarship on this young man for the next 3 years, but maybe Dan Mullen knows what he's doing here. Lucas Krull is his name. He's like the number 5 overall junior college prospect for the class of 2018. I saw where Gridiron Now, one of their reporters, had a report that Tua Tagovailoa's brother, Talia Tagovailoa, is expected to visit Tennessee. Now, I don't know how serious or how real this is, but I can't help but think about what some reporters were saying on Twitter a couple of weeks ago in the wake of Tua saying he almost transferred from Alabama, that the commitment of Tua's brother Talia Tagovailoa to Alabama when it happened was perceived as a form of manipulation to make sure Tua is the starting quarterback in 2018. And are these visits that Talia may be taking here to Tennessee another way of trying to hold Alabama's feet to the fire about making sure Tua ends up being the quarterback? It seems that some close to the Alabama program seem to be saying that, and this is probably a story worth watching. Ultimately, I think that Tagovailoa ends up at Alabama here, because I think Tua is going to be the start of the season. But the fact that he is taking visits here is, I guess, somewhat interesting. And I've been trying to get to quarterbacks with Jeff here for a while. I tried to ask him about this on Tuesday. I tried to ask him about it today. We just keep running out of time before we get there. The honest truth is I'm not that interested in the subject as of yet, because I'm not really that interested in any of these prospects. But it's kind of funny that, some of the guys that Georgia seems to have some interest in, or maybe it's better said that some of the prospects that Georgia fans start growing some interest in, they are taken off the board here. The latest is Zach Calzada from Lanier High School. Lanier is right in the shadow of where I used to live. I don't live over there anymore, but that's an area in which I've always wanted to see Georgia recruit more. Peachtree Ridge is right there in that area. North Gwinnett's right there in that area. Now Georgia's trying to recruit more of the North Gwinnett kids this year with those defensive backs, kind of populating that North Gwinnett roster. But, Lanier is a school where Georgia missed out on Derek Brown not too long ago. Would Zach Calzada have been an interesting prospect for Georgia as a quarterback in the class of 2019? Maybe. He is no longer on the board, at least for now. He commits to Texas A&M, and we've seen a few of these things, starting with Ryan Helinski, Calzada, the latest example of that. I don't there's no quarterback yet that I've fallen in love with, so I'm not that, concerned as a fan about the 2019 quarterback recruiting yet, but it is worth pointing out one of those guys was taken off the board here, and we'll make that your SEC through. All right, now on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, we'll do our Dog Day Q&A. And there is a specific reason that I'm setting this up, and it kind of comes in twofold here. I don't know if you guys saw, and if you're listening to the show on podcast or on radio, obviously this is not going to translate quite as well here, but there was the video we played on SEC Country Live yesterday. For some reason, I don't know, different videos hit you different ways. You know, there are a lot of times I see a video, and it's supposed to be sentimental or it's supposed to be emotional, and for whatever reason, it just doesn't connect with me, either because I'm just not paying close enough attention, or, you know, just cold-hearted. I don't know what it is. But yesterday, for whatever reason, this video really hit me. It was the Mississippi State fan, and he goes to he lives in Florida. He goes to his dad's house, and Hannah knows the story better than I do. Did the dad play baseball at Mississippi State? Oh, so he was a baseball player. So the dad was a baseball player, and I guess he played at both Mississippi State and Ole Miss, right? But the son is a big Mississippi State fan, and the dad's got Alzheimer's disease starting to set in. At least that's based on what I've been told. And it's this touching thing where the boy surprised the dad with the Mississippi State shirt, and then tells him here in the very early stages of Alzheimer that he wants to take him to Omaha to watch the Mississippi State Bulldogs in the College World Series. And the dad's obviously really emotional about that. Just a great, really touching video, and it hit me in a big way. And I think the reason why it hit me the way that it did was because it just kind of reminded me of how I became a Georgia fan. I don't know how often I've explained this on the program, but while many of you that listen to the show are UGA grads, I'm actually not a Georgia grad. I graduated from Georgia State, but my connection to Georgia as a fan goes back to when I was like 3 or 4 years old, and my grandfather started taking me to games, and for something about this guy's dad just kind of reminds me of my grandfather who used to take me to games. And you know, here on Father's Day weekend, obviously my dad was a big Georgia fan too, and he was very instrumental in my UGA fandom. It just kind of reminds me of how I came into this conversation, being a Georgia fan and caring a lot about this. And for our Dog Day Q&A, and we won't have a ton of time to take this during our regular broadcast, but you can certainly weigh into me on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, or on the Facebook comment section, the YouTube comment section. We'll take a few of these. I guess I am a little curious to find out how it is that you became a UGA fan. For many of you, it's the sort of traditional route where you went to school there. I mean, I know plenty of people that could have cared less about Georgia football until they arrived on campus in Athens, and obviously there's a certain level of indoctrination that takes place after that, and they become sort of dyed-in-the-wool UGA fans for the rest of their lives after that. That's sort of the typical story. And then there's people like me, sort of the atypical story, who really became connected to the football program without any real, connection to the school. Now, my brother's UGA grad. I've got plenty of friends who are UGA grads, so I've sort of become, I guess, somewhat connected to UGA on the periphery because of some of the people that I know. But as a student myself, that's not my path there. And something about that video kind of reminded me of that. So I'd love to hear your origin story of how you became a UGA fan. Hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, and here on video, we'll take a few of those comments as well. All right, we will get ready to wrap things up here today, and I mentioned Father's Day a moment ago. I've actually mentioned a couple times here over the course of the program. I wish Happy Father's Day to my dad. He's enjoying some vacation here this weekend. That's a nice thing to be able to do, and certainly appreciate him. He's a regular listener and viewer to a DawgNation Daily, and I appreciate that and appreciate his connection and his introduction for me to UGA fandom here, and I'm certainly hope you got some great Father's Day plans coming up this weekend as well, and keep Kroger in mind for that, for the grill stuff, for the party, whatever you're going to do. Kroger's a great place to do that. Let me also here today on a DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza get ready to close the show the way we always do. We're always thinking about the cocktail party, the game against Florida, 134 days from right now. We think Georgia goes back to Jacksonville. We think the Dogs beat Florida again. It's our Gator Hitter Countdown here on DawgNation Daily. Y'all have a great weekend. We'll look forward to seeing you on Monday. And here on video, we got a nice little chunk of time to take some comments. So I'd love to have you weigh in on the Dog Day Q&A if you'd like. Now, you can also talk about James Cook or C.J. Clark or anything else that you want to. But I am sort of curious about, how this got started for you because, I've obviously tried to introduce sports to my son too, and I've joked before. my son's got this weird thing where, like, he's a little hesitant to cheer for the same teams I cheer for. I don't really know where that came from because I was not that way when I was a kid. But he definitely has that sort of independent streak when it comes to, who he cheers for. But I don't care about that. I'm trying to, show him how cool sports can be because I think that your life's better as a sports fan. I just think, I'm better off for having, fallen in love with sports. And I think that he'll be better off, and my daughter the same way. She'll be better off by, having a little sports in her life and, in their lives. And so I'm grateful that I was introduced much the same way. So I'd love to hear your story on that. Or, like I said, you can talk about James Cook. You can talk about C.J. Clark. I mean, I got to tell you, I agree with some of these message board people. I don't know if C.J. Clark is a have-to-get prospect or not. I don't know. I think sometimes it's sort of hard to find truly objective opinions on that kind of stuff in the early stages of the recruiting process like this. But if he is, then Trey Scott's got to beat out North Carolina State for him. And I almost want to say the same thing about Rick Sandage from a year ago. You can say, well, Sandage's mom went to South Carolina. And yet Trey Scott was the first one to ever offer Rick Sandage. I mean, Scott had the in on Sandage given the fact that he was the first person to ever extend the offer. And yes, maybe you're a slight point spread underdog to South Carolina given the personal attention that Will Muschamp paid to Sandage. But I don't think it's wrong to say to, Trey Scott, the defensive line coach of Georgia, there's a standard of recruiting here. And in 2019, we need to see a haul of defensive linemen. In 2020 as well, as Jeff pointed out, it's going to be rich and deep in state here. But, Georgia's got some big needs here at the defensive line right now. Julian Rochester and Tyler Clark and some of these top-flight guys, they're about to cycle out of the program here in the near future. And elite names are required to replace them. And I think there's a lot of pressure on Georgia to do that right now. Now, it's not dire. It's not, incredibly negative, but it's not a nothing story necessarily either. All right, let me bounce through some comments here. Starting on Facebook, Bobby Weatherington says, these quarterback recruits take a look at our quarterback room and slump over. And, yeah, that's probably true to an extent. And yet I also think that, you got to keep that quarterback room deep. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But speaking from the perspective of a fan, I haven't necessarily picked out one of these quarterbacks that I want more than any other, or one that I was really disappointed that Georgia didn't get. I mean, I guess Ryan Helinski is probably the highest rated guy that Georgia has quote unquote missed on thus far, and I'm not even sure what I even think of him yet. So I actually kind of agree with what Miriam Martin Corbin says. It's really the 2020 class that I'm sort of more interested in from the quarterback position than 2019. And Jeff wrote about the kid from Grayson here this week, which is kind of a new name for me a little bit, but nonetheless kind of a fun thing to kind of think over. Randy Hall says, is this true that he's from Iceland, but his son graduated from UGA? That's how he got to become a Georgia fan? That's a cool story. Is that true? Wow, Iceland. How about that? I've heard nothing but great things about Iceland. A beautiful place. Reykjavik. Beautiful, beautiful place. Jeff Purcell says, Georgia Tech has beaten Georgia 2 of the last 4 years. Why shouldn't we play them? That also kind of goes back to what we talked about before. That losing streak for Georgia and Athens is something that's got to be emphatically corrected here this season. Joy Stripling says, all of us Gator haters are loving Dan Mullen's recruiting problems. She says he can't even get decent nuts to play for the school. That's obviously a reference to his blind nut comment. Here's Chris Branham on Facebook talking about his origin story as a UGA fan. He says, my dad was born in South Carolina, but I grew up a dog. We went to the 2005 Sugar Bowl, and that's when my fandom started. Football brings us closer every season. Chris, that's a great story, and it's kind of an interesting thing to think about the 2005 Sugar Bowl being the genesis of that, because I think for most people, the 2005 Sugar Bowl is actually a bad memory. Georgia was down big that day to West Virginia, almost came back and won. Great game, but sort of a bad showing for Willie Martinez's defense there. But it's kind of cool to think that was enough of a connection to sort of start a UGA fandom for you. As you said, it's more about the trip going to the game with family there. That's a really good story. And, a lot of these things are somewhat atypical. It'd be one thing if you said, I was at the 2007 Sugar Bowl. when Georgia, blasted its way through, Hawaii. That's a little easier to understand. That game, the 2005 game against West Virginia, is not one of the ones that you would have thought about, but that's the way these origin stories sort of go sometimes. They're not exactly the way you would script them. New level recruiting, thank you. C.J. Dixon is the name of the Grayson quarterback. How about this? 6'6", 220. Is that what? So I know his speed has been talked about. He's a big, tall guy, kind of a big guy, but he ran really fast, ran an incredibly fast 40. Jeff wrote about that, and I think that's what New Level's also referencing here. Well, he says he's been on the scene for some time now, can run and sling it. Yeah, listen, I love these tall quarterbacks who can run. I mean, that's kind of a cool body type, right? When you are a tall quarterback that can run and sling it, that is an interesting prospect to think more about. I appreciate. And is New Level recruiting? Is that Junior? Is that who that is? I appreciate him checking in. Yeah, 225 pounds. Yeah, that is really something. Good looking prospect there for sure. Enrique Murillo says the decision of a quarterback is going to depend on if Fields gets redshirted or not. Maybe so, but I mean, I hate to go back to the Alabama comparison, but Alabama recruited 2 quarterbacks in the wake of Jalen Hurts having a big season in 2016. Now, you can say, well, maybe Tua and Mac Jones didn't think that Jalen Hurts could be very good, and that's a little bit different with Fields and Fromm, maybe so, but it was Tua who was the real prize recruit that year, and yet Alabama still was able to bring in Mac Jones. I mean, I think that the final frontier for Kirby Smart at Georgia, and this is a hard thing to do, but it's just what you got to do if you want to compete with the very best, is you've got to promise something other than playing time. And Kirby Smart's talked about this, and I think this is really smart, that he said that he's not necessarily selling playing time, he's selling development. He's selling offense that's similar to what NFL teams are doing, and the kind of coaching and structure you're going to get at UGA. You may not be playing for 4 years, but you're going to be growing and developing for 4 years. And I think that stuff works. At least I think it can work. It's not the easiest thing to sell. Early playing time. Hey, you're our guy. We're not recruiting any other quarterbacks. That's the easiest sell pitch. But honestly, Georgia doesn't want to be the kind of program that has to make those kind of pitches. Yeah, so New Level recruiting on YouTube is Junior Baker. Yeah, he's always got some great recruiting information. And no worries in the typo there, Junior. Good stuff. Mike Johnson's daddy says, I thought the West Virginia Sugar Bowl loss was 2002, not 2005. No, the 2002 Sugar Bowl was against Florida State. And if I told you in 2002 Georgia played Florida State, if you're a little younger, that may sound like the greatest game in the world. Let me tell you how not the greatest game in the world that was. It was a depleted Florida State team. And for a Georgia team that was legitimately good, that 2002 Sugar Bowl was always such a letdown. Am I remembering this correctly? Anquan Bolden, who went on to be a very good NFL wide receiver, I think he played quarterback for Florida State that day. This was not a good Florida State team. Now, there were a lot of good Florida State teams in that part of the early 2000s. This was not one of them. I mean, I've always wanted to see Georgia play Florida State more because, if you go down to Moultrie, and we have people who listen to us from down there in Albany, or as they say, Albany, if you go down there to that part of the state, I mean, they're Thomasville. There are Florida State fans everywhere. I'd love to see Georgia and Florida State play more. They did in 2002. It should have been a great game, and Florida State was just they were a wrecked team by the time they got to that Sugar Bowl. Bolden was playing quarterback, and that's crazy to think about. Let me pop over here to YouTube here for a moment. JY says, walked to all the home games through the late 70s, early 80s, saw all of Herschel's games, loved those days, grew up about 5 blocks from Sanford. Dad's office was a block from the stadium. That's a cool story. Walking to the games is sort of a fun thing to think about. That's really nice. Miriam Martin Corbin mentioning Ed Thelenius. Now, Ed Thelenius was the play-by-play announcer at UGA before Larry Munson. That is a real significant name check. Good job on that name check there from Ed Thelenius. Good stuff. Morris Rich says, I was born in Swainsboro, grew up in Orlando, but have always been a Gator hater. Would listen to Munson whenever I can. have always been a dog. Morris, that's a great story. I love hearing these stories. I can listen to them all day long. We are out of time for now, though, so let me get ready to say happy weekend to all of you. To the dads out there, happy Father's Day. To those of you who have dads, give your dad a call. Tell him happy Father's Day. Let that be my PSA to you. We'll be back on Monday at 10 a.m. If you missed a portion of our regular broadcast, great stuff from Jeff today. It'll be up for you at DawgNation.com and SoundCloud and all those other podcast outlets here in just a moment. And then live back again tomorrow on Monday morning, Monday morning, 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily Live presented by Marco's Pizza. I'll look forward to seeing you then. Hope you all have a great weekend between now and then.